we are, the final quiz of this quick semester. Um, and this one is going to be covering the devotion of subject X, which is, I think, one of the more interesting reads you have this term. Something similar in some ways, a detective's way, methods of doing things, but um, really kind of different because we have, we did have this in our second novel and somewhat in our first one where there's an outsider who helps. And this is, we have Detective Galileo, who actually is a professor of physics. And he's able to suss out, as you're going to find by asking a couple questions, hair loss and some other things, that his friend from college is the murderer. Well, yeah. You'll find out. Well, you already know that there's the double murder here, and this is the devotion of the other person who just loves math, and that is now that's Ishigami. Ishigami teaches math at a private school, private high school, not far from where he lives. I mean, he is devoted to math. He's a bit of he's a bit I want to say he's not your usual person, although he does fall for the woman, and doesn't really have that much experience, if you will. Now, prior to taking a job at Bentente, Yazuki worked, I suspect we'd call it, this is where, let me see, she met her second husband, and I can't remember exactly where, but it wasn't at a theater by any means. So you remember that question. Yasuko, though, worked as many women do in Japan. If you look up the kind of job that she had prior to that, it was at a place, not a theater, but really a bar, but kind of a private bar with a matron in charge, and these have been corrupted into whorehouses and whatnot. But it's a place where men go and cuddle up, if you will, usually not sharing their private life. But Yasuko does in the end. Um, she has a new boyfriend who was married but is now divorced, and it gets very complicated who's seeking her affection. Um, Now, when Yasuko met her former husband, Shinji Togashi, now that's the one she murders after he threatens her daughter. At any rate, he worked as a foreign car salesman, and then he had some money for a while, but then became a deadbeat, and she got rid of him, and she has her daughter from another marriage. And so she divorced her first husband. We don't hear from him, and then she killed her second husband, and then plots with our man to get away from responsibility for the murder. So we haven't had this kind of thing yet because we actually know who did the murder, and so the book is really about how these guys, the one detective, and his partner, are able, working together, and then a little friction there, but they're equally smart, I suppose, in their own ways. Now, protect her mother, Misato. Um, After she doesn't protect her mother, Togashi tries to kill Yusuko. Well, tries to attack Yusuko's daughter, um, and the mother kills him with a it's like a heating dish of some kind that the are are the killer of the other man to set up uh, the murder victim to make it look like it was a different day so that Misato doesn't have to lie. It's a very interesting and complicated web of intrigue and devotion and emotion. Um, now, uh, Manabu Yukawa is a physicist, and he can solve complex problems in his head, and he generally beats Detective Kusanagi easily at chess. He likes to give him a hard time about it. He and this he looks into it basically as a kind of a chess problem with a scientific method behind it because of his uh, he knows the killer. And I mean, he knows him quite well. Now, the police think they have identified Shingi Togasaki as the murder victim by the river. When fingerprints on the bike near the murder scene match prints found in a room Togashi had rented, or they thought he had rented. This is all part of the creating a new identity of the killer. Now, I mean, it's not that Ishigami teaches math. I don't think he likes his students all that much, but he also supervises a judo club. So it's not like he doesn't do anything except math, and but he's happy to. That's one of the big things here. And he, fell in love, if you will, with the woman because, well, there's no love has no sort of logical thing to talk about it. I like it. At Imperial University, Ishigami was called, I like this name, Buddha. When you're thinking of someone with a face you can't read very well. Um, then the man who is what I want to say trying to win over Yasuko's affection is Mr. Kudo. Now, this does not sit well with Buddha, but he has to come to terms with it. And I suppose in a way he actually does, because he's the devotion part to her. But he does feel that she's betrayed him because she goes out with Mr. Kudo, and he goes a little nuts over this. And see, there's was a part of his plan to ensure that Yusuko will not get blamed for the murder of her former husband. Ishigami carries Togashi to a riverside where he bashes his face. No, that's not what he does. That's what it's supposed to look like. He murders a homeless man he has named the Engineer. Now, when you start reading, you'll see that that guy appears early in the book too, because this is Ishigami. Well, let's just say he has a good eye for detail, and he sees this guy who hasn't noted that was around before, and he sort of can read personalities in some ways, so he just names him the Engineer, and he's reinventing the murder because he doesn't think anybody will miss the homeless person, and in that respect, he's probably right on. Now, Yasuko murdered her former husband on March 9, although Ishigami leaves evidence to suggest that the murder took place on March 10. Therefore, all the things about going to the theater and all the other stuff that went on, Yusuko can tell the truth about those things. Because the false story, well, it's not a false story. She doesn't have to lie a lot so that she can hide the truth of the matter, which she really doesn't know, actually, because her co-murderer shrouds what he does in evidence. Now, yeah, the Yukawa, Galileo, he decides, the physics person decides that his old friend Ishigami is in love. Gami, excuse me, is in love. After Ishigami mentions that Yukawa has more hair than he. Now, here's where you get into the intuition of the things that is so central to the Japanese fiction. A lot of people think that there's not a lot of passion, which isn't true at all. It's just that you don't show passion openly a lot of the time. So in the end, when Ishigami just breaks out in a sort of I don't know, kind of almost primordial scream, that's really something. When he realizes that he did everything for nothing because she's admitted to the murder, which we would have to think, well, wait a minute, that was self-defense, whatever. I don't. The book doesn't go into that. And for Ishigami, going to prison is not for him the end of everything, because he realizes that if he's in prison, and he'll be fed, and the kitchen will be okay, but he'll be able to do math as much as he wants, and that's how dedicated he is to it. So for him, in the long run, the sacrifice isn't so much if as he comes to terms with his loved one. When Ishigami confesses to the murder of Shingi Togashi, he tells Kusangi that he wishes that he had not committed the murder because Yasuko betrayed him, and that is, he just feels that she's betrayed him by going out with that other guy. Except it gets a little more complicated, because after Yukawa figures out that Ishigami murdered someone, and that he figures it out, the detective hasn't yet, he tells Yasuko of the sacrifice Ishigami made owing to his devotion to her. Now, notice he doesn't tell her to confess. This is your Japanese kind of what's going on here is that he's planting a seed, and so he's making her feel guilty and moving her slowly into the direction of confessing to murder. As Yukawa tells his friend Ishigami that, when the whole idea of what he's doing, the murder and the devotion and all that, he says that he's capable of doing anything so long as it makes logical sense. So he says of his friend Ishigami that he's capable of doing anything as long as it makes logical sense. And if you think about it through the emotion and the devotion, there is a sort of a logical thought problem going on there that, of course, Yukawa figures out. Now, and after learning, though, about the truth about Ishigami's having committed murder, Kusangi promises his friend Yukawa that he will drop the investigation of Yasuko once Ishigami is convicted, saying that she deserves a second chance. So here we have the little bit of the conflict that goes on in there, although he's already put the seed in there. And we do see that Ishigami basically tells her, he suggests that, or he stops blaming her for Kudo, because he just wants her to be happy, and tells her that in a final note, as I remember. And so you have basically the solving of the murder, but the whole thing weighs heavily and emotionally on the mother, but also on her daughter Misato. And So once Yasuto learns the truth about Ishigami's terrible sacrifice for her, Yasuto turns herself in for the murder of her husband, but not long after her own daughter Misato attempts suicide. So we get to see how these feelings are just percolating under the surface, and then they come out in these surprising ways. I mean, we almost forget about the daughter for a while there. But she's having trouble in school, as you find out when you're reading through there. So the attempted suicide does not strike us as um, something that doesn't make sense in terms of how the novel operates. I think that on the discussion thread too, you'll have fun thinking about the methods that are used by the detective, who in many ways is similar to other ones we've had working in the department. But he also has this outside detective, Galileo, who's not really a detective. He's a physicist, except he gets involved, which sometimes upsets Detective Kusanagi, but on the other hand, helps him solve cases. So, and there are other books in the series. I haven't gotten to them. I'm going to be teaching the class again in the spring, so I'll have a chance, since I've read these books a couple times, to go on and finish some others, and I'm finishing up the fourth one now, from the author of A Beautiful Place to Die. And I hope that you all will um, pick up some of these other detective novels from other countries, not just from non-Western countries, because it's a great international genre, and there's wonderful stuff written in Poland and other places like that. Okay, well, do a good job on the quiz, the final one. You have 20 questions, and I've given you all the answers in my usual fashion. So do a good job, um, and thanks a lot for this semester, my next to last uh, at Peru State College.